The desert air shimmered with heat as Master Sergeant Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead. The massive military airfield stretched endlessly under the scorching Middle Eastern sun, with rows of helicopters and transport planes creating geometric shadows on the tarmac. Jake had been working as a weapons loader for 8 years, and the routine had become second nature to him. Load the magazines, check the ammunition, secure the weapons systems, and move on to the next aircraft. Today felt different, though. Something electric seemed to hang in the air, perhaps because of the high-stakes mission briefing he had overheard earlier. The brass was talking about a critical extraction operation deep in hostile territory, the kind that could make or break careers and lives. Jake pushed these thoughts aside as he approached the AH-64 Apache gunship that would be his focus for the morning. The helicopter sat like a mechanical predator, its sleek profile and intimidating weapon systems a testament to military engineering. Jake began his methodical process, opening the ammunition compartments and preparing to load the 30mm cannon rounds. Each magazine held dozens of high-explosive shells, each one capable of devastating damage. The weight of responsibility never escaped him. These weapons would soon be used to protect soldiers in the field. As he worked, Jake noticed the pilot approaching from across the tarmac. Captain Sarah Chen was known throughout the base as one of the most skilled helicopter pilots in the squadron. Her reputation for precision flying and cool decision-making under pressure had earned her respect from everyone, from the newest recruits to the most seasoned officers. She walked with the confident stride of someone who had faced danger countless times and emerged victorious. Jake had loaded weapons for Captain Chen's aircraft many times before, but they had never exchanged more than professional pleasantries. She was focused, serious, and completely dedicated to her mission. Today, however, something seemed different about her demeanor. There was a tension in her shoulders, a slight hesitation in her usual commanding presence that Jake found curious. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Jake continued his work, the metal surfaces of the aircraft becoming almost too hot to touch. The base was beginning to buzz with activity, as other crews prepared for their respective missions. Mechanics were performing final checks, intelligence officers were reviewing satellite imagery, and medical personnel were ensuring their equipment was ready for potential casualties. Jake reached for another magazine, his movements automatic after years of practice. The ammunition was pristine, each round carefully inspected and approved for combat use. He took pride in his work, knowing that a pilot's life might depend on every shell he loaded. The responsibility was enormous, but Jake had never faltered in his duty. As Captain Chen drew closer to the aircraft, Jake could see her more clearly. She was wearing her standard flight suit, helmet in hand, with all the patches and insignia that marked her as an experienced combat pilot. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation style, and her expression was focused on the mission ahead. She began her own pre-flight inspection, checking various components of the aircraft with practiced efficiency. The two military professionals worked in parallel, each focused on their critical responsibilities. Jake loading the weapons that would provide offensive capability, and Captain Chen ensuring that every system on the aircraft was functioning perfectly. The desert wind picked up slightly, creating small dust devils that danced across the airfield before dissipating in the heat. Jake was nearly finished with the ammunition loading when he noticed Captain Chen removing her flight jacket. The temperature was rising rapidly, and even the lightweight military clothing was becoming uncomfortable in the intense heat. She hung the jacket on a nearby equipment cart and rolled up the sleeves of her flight suit, a practical adjustment that many pilots made in these conditions. It was then that Jake's world suddenly shifted. As Captain Chen reached up to adjust something on the aircraft, her sleeve pulled back further, revealing her forearm. What Jake saw there would change everything he thought he knew about the pilot he had worked alongside for months. The discovery would challenge his understanding of loyalty, identity, and the complex realities of military service in a dangerous world where nothing was ever quite as simple as it seemed. Jake's hands froze on the ammunition magazine he was holding. There, clearly visible on Captain Chen's exposed forearm, was a tattoo that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the intricate design or artistic quality that shocked him. It was the symbol itself, a serpent wrapped around a crescent moon with specific geometric patterns surrounding it. Jake recognized it immediately from classified briefings he had attended about enemy identification. This was the mark of the Iron Serpent, a militant organization that had been responsible for numerous attacks against coalition forces. The tattoo was their calling card, their way of identifying each other in a world where trust could mean the difference between life and death. Jake had seen photographs of this exact symbol in intelligence reports, always accompanied by warnings about the dangerous individuals who bore it. His mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. Captain Chen had been flying combat missions for months, protecting ground troops, conducting reconnaissance flights, and engaging enemy targets. She had access to classified information, flight plans, troop movements, and strategic intelligence. If she was connected to the Iron Serpent, the implications were staggering. Jake forced himself to continue loading the ammunition, his hands moving automatically while his thoughts churned. He couldn't let Captain Chen know that he had seen the eye tattoo or that he understood its significance. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to raise an alarm, to report what he had discovered immediately. But another part of his mind urged caution. What if there was an explanation? What if the tattoo meant something else entirely? Captain Chen continued her pre-flight inspection, seemingly unaware of Jake's internal turmoil. She checked the rotor systems, examined the engine components, and tested various electronic systems with the same professional competence she had always displayed. Her movements were confident and precise, showing no signs of nervousness or guilt that Jake might have expected from someone harboring dangerous secrets. The heat was becoming oppressive, and Jake could feel sweat soaking through his uniform. His heart was pounding, not from the physical exertion of loading heavy ammunition, but from the weight of his discovery. He glanced around the airfield, wondering if anyone else had noticed anything unusual about Captain Chen. The other ground, crew members were going about their duties normally, showing no signs of concern or suspicion. Jake tried to think rationally about the situation. Perhaps the tattoo was from before Captain Chen's military service. Maybe it was something she had gotten as a young person, before she understood its implications. People sometimes made poor decisions about permanent body art that they later regretted. But even as he considered these possibilities, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The tattoo was fresh-looking, not faded like something from years past. The colors were vibrant, the lines crisp and clean. This wasn't an old mistake from a misspent youth. This was recent work, possibly done since Captain Chen had been serving at this base. The realization made Jake's stomach turn as he contemplated the possible meanings and implications. As he finished loading the last magazine, Jake's mind was flooded with questions. How long had Captain Chen been working with the enemy? What information had she passed along? How many soldiers might have been put at risk because of her betrayal? The weight of these possibilities pressed down on him like the oppressive desert heat. Captain Chen completed her inspection and turned toward Jake with a professional nod. "Everything loaded properly, Sergeant Morrison?" she asked, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone it always had. There was nothing in her demeanor to suggest that she was anything other than a dedicated military officer preparing for another dangerous mission. "Yes, ma'am," Jake managed to reply, his voice sounding normal despite the chaos in his thoughts. "All systems are loaded and ready for combat operations." The words felt strange coming from his mouth, knowing what he now suspected about the person who would be controlling those weapons. Captain Chen smiled briefly, the kind of professional acknowledgement that Jake had seen hundreds of times before. But now it felt different, tainted by the knowledge of what he had seen. Was this smile genuine, or was it the calculated expression of someone who had been deceiving her colleagues for months? Jake found himself studying her face for signs of deception, looking for tells that might reveal her true nature. The mission briefing was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and Captain Chen would soon be receiving detailed information about troop positions, extraction routes, and tactical objectives. Jake watched as she gathered her equipment and prepared to head toward the operations center. Every step she took felt like another betrayal, another moment when classified information might be compromised. Jake stood frozen beside the gunship as Captain Chen walked away toward the operations center. His duty was clear. He should immediately report his discovery to his commanding officer. Protocol demanded that he alert security about a potential security breach. Yet something held him back, a nagging doubt that made him hesitate before taking such a drastic step. The implications of making a false accusation against a respected pilot were enormous. Captain Chen had an exemplary service record, commendations for bravery and the trust of everyone on the base. If Jake was wrong about the tattoo's meaning, his career would be over. He would be known as the man who destroyed an innocent officer's reputation based on a misunderstanding. The military didn't look kindly on those who made unfounded accusations against their fellow soldiers. Jake decided he needed more information before making any decisions. He finished securing the ammunition compartments and began walking toward the base intelligence office, his mind working through various scenarios. Perhaps there were records that could shed light on Captain Chen's background, or maybe someone in intelligence could provide context about the tattoo that Jake had missed. The intelligence office was housed in a concrete building designed to withstand attacks, its windows small and its entrance guarded by armed personnel. Jake approached Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, an intelligence analyst he had worked with on previous occasions. She was known for her thoroughness and discretion, qualities that Jake desperately needed right now. "Rodriguez, I need to ask you something." In confidence, Jake said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "It's about tattoo identification, specifically the iron serpent markings we've been briefed about." Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from her computer screen, her expression immediately becoming serious. The iron serpent was a topic that demanded careful attention, given the organization's history of attacks against coalition forces. "What do you need to know, Morrison? This isn't something we discuss casually." Jake described the tattoo he had seen, providing as much detail as possible, without mentioning Captain Chen by name. He explained the serpent wrapped around the crescent moon, the geometric patterns and the apparent freshness of the artwork. Rodriguez listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific design elements. "That matches our intelligence files exactly," Rodriguez confirmed, pulling up classified documents on her secure computer terminal. "The Iron Serpent uses this particular design as their primary identification mark. It's not something you see accidentally or coincidentally. The specific geometric patterns are like a signature. They're intentionally unique to prevent imitation." Jake's heart sank as his worst fears were confirmed. The tattoo wasn't a coincidence or a misunderstanding. It was exactly what he had feared it might be. But Rodriguez wasn't finished with her explanation. "However," she continued, lowering her voice even further, "there's something else you should know. Our intelligence sources have indicated that some of our deep cover operatives have been using these same tattoos as part of their infiltration operations. It's a dangerous game, but sometimes our people need to appear completely authentic to penetrate enemy organizations." This revelation hit Jake like a thunderbolt. The possibility that Captain Chen might be working undercover for coalition intelligence had never occurred to him. It would explain why she had access to classified information and why she was trusted with critical missions. It would also explain the apparent freshness of the tattoo. It might be part of an ongoing operation. "How would I know if someone is one of ours versus one of theirs?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question felt dangerous to even ask, touching on operational security issues that were far above his clearance level. Rodriguez hesitated before answering. "That's classified information that I can't share. But if you suspect someone might be compromised, you need to report it through proper channels immediately. The stakes are too high to take chances based on assumptions." Jake left the intelligence office with more questions than answers. The possibility that Captain Chen was an undercover operative added a new layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. If she was working for coalition intelligence, reporting her as a suspected enemy agent could compromise a critical operation and put lives at risk. As he walked back across the airfield, Jake noticed increased activity around the helicopter squadron. The mission that Captain Chen would be flying was clearly important, with senior officers moving between aircraft and ground crews working with unusual urgency. The sight of all this preparation made Jake's dilemma even more pressing. Time was running out. The mission briefing would begin soon, and Captain Chen would receive sensitive information about troop positions and operational objectives. If she was an enemy agent, this information could be used to set up an ambush that would cost American lives. If she was an undercover operative, Jake's interference could destroy months or years of careful intelligence work. Jake found himself standing beside the Apache gunship he had just finished loading, staring at the weapons he had carefully prepared. These same weapons might soon be used to protect American soldiers in the field, or they might be turned against them if Captain Chen was indeed working for the enemy. The weight of this responsibility felt crushing in the oppressive desert heat. He pulled out his secure communication device, holding it in his trembling hands. One call to his commanding officer would set in motion a chain of events that couldn't be stopped. Captain Chen would be detained, questioned, and investigated. If she was innocent or working undercover, her career and possibly her life would be destroyed. If she was guilty, Jake's action might save countless lives. Jake's finger hovered over the call button on his secure device when he noticed something that made him pause. Captain Chen was walking back from the operations center, but she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Colonel Marcus Wright, the base's intelligence chief, and they appeared to be engaged in intense conversation. This was unusual. Pilots typically didn't have private discussions with intelligence chiefs unless something significant was happening. Jake moved closer, pretending to inspect another aircraft while straining to overhear their conversation. The colonel's voice was too low to make out specific words, but his body language suggested urgency and concern. Captain Chen was nodding frequently, asking questions, and taking notes in a small notebook that Jake had never seen her use before. Interaction between the pilot and the intelligence chief raised new questions in Jake's mind. If Captain Chen was an enemy agent, would she be having such an open conversation with the person responsible for base security? The scenario didn't make sense from an operational security perspective. Enemy infiltrators typically avoided drawing attention from intelligence personnel. As Jake watched, Colonel Wright handed Captain Chen what appeared to be a sealed envelope. She examined it carefully before tucking it inside her flight suit. The colonel then shook her hand in a gesture that seemed more personal than the usual military courtesy. There was something about their interaction that suggested a deeper professional relationship than Jake had previously realized. Captain Chen began walking back toward her aircraft, but her demeanor had changed noticeably. The tension Jake had observed earlier was gone, replaced by what looked like determination mixed with concern. She moved with purpose, checking her equipment more thoroughly than usual, and spending extra time reviewing her flight instruments. Jake made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Instead of making the call to report his suspicions, he decided to observe Captain Chen more closely during her mission preparation. If she was planning to betray the operation, there might be other signs that would confirm his fears. If she was legitimately working for coalition forces, her behavior would likely reflect normal pre-mission procedures. The mission briefing had concluded, and pilots were returning to their aircraft for final preparations. Jake positioned himself where he could observe Captain Chen without being obvious about it. She was going through her pre-flight checklist with unusual care, double-checking systems that she normally trusted implicitly. As Jake watched, he noticed Captain Chen pull out a different communication device than the standard military radio. She spoke into it briefly, using what sounded like code words or phrases that Jake couldn't understand. The conversation lasted only a few seconds, but it was clearly different from normal military communications protocols. Jake's suspicions flared again. Why would Captain Chen be using non-standard communication equipment? Was she reporting mission details to enemy contacts? The timing was certainly suspicious. Just after receiving her mission briefing and whatever information Colonel Wright had provided in that sealed envelope. However, Jake also knew that special operations often involved non-standard equipment and procedures. If Captain Chen was involved in classified intelligence work, She might legitimately need to communicate through secure channels that weren't part of normal military protocols. The challenge was determining which scenario was actually occurring. The desert heat was reaching its peak intensity, and Jake could feel his uniform soaking through with perspiration. The stress of his dilemma was making the physical discomfort even worse. He found himself constantly second-guessing his observations, wondering if his suspicions were coloring his interpretation of normal activities. Captain Chen finished her communication and returned to her aircraft preparation. She was joined by her co-pilot, Lieutenant Mark Stevens, a young officer who clearly respected her expertise and leadership. Their interaction seemed completely normal, professional, focused, and consistent with the working relationship Jake had observed many times before. As Jake watched the two pilots coordinate their preparations, he realized something important. If Captain Chen was an enemy agent, she was putting Lieutenant Stevens at risk as well. The co-pilot would be completely vulnerable if the aircraft commander had hostile intentions. This realization added another layer of urgency to Jake's dilemma. It wasn't just about Captain Chen anymore, but also about the innocent co-pilot who would be flying with her. The mission was scheduled to begin in less than 30 minutes. Ground crews were completing their final checks, fuel trucks were topping off aircraft tanks, and medical personnel were standing by for potential casualties. The entire base was focused on ensuring the success of this critical operation. Jake watched as Captain Chen and Lieutenant Stevens began their engine start procedures. The Apache's twin turbine engines wound up with their characteristic high-pitched whine, and the massive rotor blades began to turn slowly. The aircraft was transforming from a static machine into a living weapon system, ready to carry out whatever mission had been planned. As the engines reached operational speed, Jake made another crucial observation. Captain Chen's flying techniques were flawless, demonstrating the kind of skill and precision that came from years of legitimate military training. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced confidence, and her communication with air traffic control followed proper procedures exactly. Jake found himself facing an impossible choice. Every piece of evidence he had observed could be interpreted in multiple ways. The tattoo could mark her as an enemy agent or an undercover operative. Her unusual communications could be treacherous or necessary for classified operations. Her interaction with the intelligence chief could indicate compromise or special mission requirements. The Apache helicopter lifted off the tarmac with Captain Chen at the controls, its rotor wash creating a small sandstorm that forced Jake to shield his eyes. As the aircraft gained altitude and disappeared into the desert haze, Jake felt a crushing weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had made his choice to remain silent and observe rather than report his suspicions. Now he could only wait and pray that he had made the right decision. Jake spent the next several hours in a state of anxious anticipation. He completed his assigned duties mechanically, loading ammunition for other aircraft and performing routine maintenance tasks. But his mind remained focused on the mission he couldn't see. Every radio communication from the field made him tense, wondering if it might bring news of betrayal or disaster. The operations center maintained a careful silence about ongoing missions, but Jake could sense tension among the senior staff. Officers moved with purpose between communication stations, and there seemed to be more activity than usual for a routine operation. Whether this indicated problems with Captain Chen's mission or simply reflected the high stakes of the overall operation was impossible to determine. As afternoon stretched into evening, Jake found himself repeatedly checking the flight schedule and mission timelines. The Apache crew should have completed their initial objectives by now and moved on to the secondary phase of their operation. The fact that no emergency calls had come through the radio was encouraging, but it didn't eliminate Jake's concerns about what might be happening in the field. Around sunset, Jake was performing inventory checks in the ammunition storage area when Sergeant Rodriguez from intelligence approached him with an expression he couldn't read. His heart immediately began racing, fearing that his earlier inquiries about tattoo identification had somehow connected him to Captain Chen's mission. "Morrison, I need to speak with you privately," Rodriguez said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. It's about our conversation earlier today regarding the Iron Serpent markings. Jake followed Rodriguez to a secure area behind the storage facility, his mind racing through possible explanations for this unexpected contact. Had someone discovered his knowledge about Captain Chen's tattoo? Was he about to be questioned about failing to report his suspicions? The possibilities were all frightening. "I've been authorized to share some additional information with you," Rodriguez began carefully. "Your questions today coincided with some ongoing operations that I can't discuss in detail. However, I can tell you that we have assets in the field whose safety depends on maintaining certain operational security protocols." Jake felt his stomach drop as the implications became clear. Rodriguez was essentially confirming that there were undercover operatives whose lives could be endangered if their covers were blown. This strongly suggested that Captain Chen might indeed be working for Coalition intelligence rather than against it. "I'm not asking you to identify anyone or reveal what prompted your questions," Rodriguez continued. "But I need you to understand that some situations are more complex than they appear on the surface. People who seem suspicious might actually be working to protect American lives in ways that aren't obvious to outside observers." The weight of Rodriguez's words hit Jake like a physical blow. If Captain Chen was an undercover operative, his suspicions and observations could have compromised a critical intelligence operation. His decision to remain silent might have been correct, but for reasons he never could have imagined. "Is there anything I should be doing or not doing?" Jake asked carefully, not wanting to admit his specific concerns but desperate for guidance. "Just follow normal protocols," Rodriguez replied. "Trust the system, trust your leadership, and don't make assumptions about situations you don't fully understand. Sometimes the people who appear most suspicious are actually the ones working hardest to keep us all safe." As Rodriguez walked away, Jake felt a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety. The conversation had provided some reassurance about Captain Chen's likely status, but it had also highlighted how little he really understood about the complex world of military intelligence operations. Night fell over the desert base, bringing cooler temperatures but no reduction in Jake's stress levels. The Apache crew was now several hours into their mission, operating in hostile territory where enemy forces were known to be active. Every minute that passed without communication increased the possibility that something had gone wrong. Jake was attempting to distract himself with routine maintenance tasks when the base's communication systems suddenly came alive with urgent radio traffic. Multiple aircraft were reporting contact with enemy forces, and medical evacuation helicopters were being scrambled to respond to casualties in the field. The mission had clearly taken a dangerous turn. Within minutes, the entire base was mobilized for emergency operations. Medical personnel prepared trauma facilities, aircraft crews readied rescue helicopters, and command staff coordinated response efforts from the operations center. Jake found himself assigned to prepare emergency ammunition loads for aircraft that might be called into combat support roles. As he worked frantically to ready weapons systems, Jake caught fragments of radio communications that made his blood run cold. Ground forces were reporting an ambush, casualties were mounting, and extraction operations were being complicated by heavy enemy fire. The exact location of Captain Chen's aircraft wasn't clear from the radio traffic, but the entire operation was clearly in jeopardy. Jake's worst fears seemed to be materializing before his eyes. Had Captain Chen used her access to classified information to set up the ambush? Were American soldiers dying because he had failed to report his suspicions about her tattoo? The guilt and anguish were almost overwhelming as he contemplated the possible consequences of his decision to remain silent. The radio crackled with urgent communications as Jake worked desperately to prepare additional ammunition for the rescue aircraft being deployed. Through the chaos of overlapping voices and emergency protocols, he caught fragments of what was happening in the field. Ground forces had walked into a carefully planned ambush, enemy fighters had appeared from multiple directions simultaneously, and the extraction operation had become a fighting retreat. Jake's hands trembled as he loaded magazines, each round representing potential salvation for the soldiers trapped in the desert. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. Had Captain Chen's intelligence access enabled the enemy to predict exactly where coalition forces would be? Were men dying because he had failed to act on his suspicions? Suddenly, a clear voice cut through the radio static. It was Captain Chen, calling in target coordinates for immediate air support. Her voice was calm and professional despite what must have been intense combat conditions. Apache 77 requesting immediate close air support on grid coordinates, 274559, multiple enemy positions engaging friendly ground forces. Jake stopped loading ammunition as he listened to Captain Chen's communications. She was providing precise targeting information that would help rescue the trapped ground forces. Her coordinates were accurate, her tactical assessments were sound, and her actions were clearly focused on protecting American lives. This wasn't the behavior of someone working for the enemy. Over the next 30 minutes, Captain Chen's voice appeared repeatedly on the radio as she coordinated close air support operations. She was identifying enemy positions, directing strike aircraft to critical targets, and providing tactical guidance that was helping turn the tide of the battle. Her Apache gunship was engaging hostile forces with the same ammunition that Jake had loaded earlier that morning. As the combat reports continued, a clearer picture emerged of what was actually happening. The ambush hadn't been the result of betrayed intelligence. It was a carefully planned enemy operation that coalition forces had walked into despite their best precautions. Captain Chen and her co-pilot had responded to the emergency by immediately engaging enemy positions and coordinating rescue operations. Jake felt a wave of relief mixed with admiration as he realized the true nature of Captain Chen's actions. Far from betraying her fellow soldiers, she was risking her own life to save them. The tattoo that had caused him such anxiety was irrelevant compared to her actions under fire. Whatever the marking meant, her loyalty to coalition forces was being demonstrated in the most dangerous possible circumstances. The emergency continued for several more hours as medical evacuation helicopters extracted wounded soldiers and additional aircraft provided cover for the withdrawal of ground forces. Captain Chen's Apache remained in the combat area throughout the operation, providing continuous fire support and tactical coordination. Her fuel reserves were running dangerously low, but she refused to leave until all friendly forces were safely evacuated. As dawn broke over the desert base, the returning aircraft began landing one by one. Medical personnel rushed to treat the wounded, intelligence officers debriefed the air crews, and maintenance teams began assessing battle damage to the helicopters. Jake watched anxiously for Captain Chen's Apache, hoping to see both crew members return safely from their dangerous mission. When the Apache finally appeared on the horizon, Jake could see that it had been hit by enemy fire. Bullet holes were visible in the fuselage. One of the weapon systems appeared damaged, and the aircraft was flying with an unusual attitude that suggested mechanical problems. Despite these issues, Captain Chen brought the helicopter in for a controlled landing that demonstrated exceptional piloting skill. As the engines wound down and the rotor blades stopped turning, Captain Chen and Lieutenant Stevens climbed out of the cockpit. Both pilots appeared exhausted and shaken by their combat experience, but they were alive and uninjured. Captain Chen immediately began discussing the mission with intelligence officers, while Lieutenant Stevens coordinated with maintenance personnel about the aircraft damage. Jake approached the damaged Apache to begin assessing what repairs would be needed. As he examined the bullet holes and damaged systems, Captain Chen walked over to thank him for the ammunition loading that had enabled their combat effectiveness. Her flight suit was torn in several places, and there were traces of desert sand on her face and equipment. "Your work made a difference out there, Morrison," she said quietly. "Those rounds you loaded helped us save some good soldiers today. The weapon systems performed perfectly when we needed them most." Jake looked at Captain Chen with new eyes, seeing not the suspicious figure he had feared, but a combat veteran who had just risked everything to protect her fellow service members. The tattoo was still visible on her forearm, but its meaning no longer seemed important compared to her demonstrated courage and loyalty. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Jake said hesitantly. "That tattoo on your arm, what does it represent?" Captain Chen glanced down at the marking that had caused Jake so much anxiety. A slight smile crossed her face as she considered how to respond. "It's from a previous assignment, Morrison. Sometimes the work we do requires us to become someone else entirely, to go places and do things that most people would never understand. That tattoo represents 2 years of my life that I spent earning the trust of people who wanted to kill American soldiers. The realization hit Jake like a thunderbolt. Captain Chen had been an undercover operative, infiltrating enemy organizations to gather intelligence that could save lives. The fresh-looking tattoo wasn't a sign of betrayal. It was evidence of an incredibly dangerous assignment that required her to appear completely authentic to hostile forces. The mission is over now, she continued. But some marks take longer to fade than others. What matters is what we do with the intelligence we gather and the trust that our fellow soldiers place in us. Jake nodded silently, understanding finally dawning about the complex realities of modern military operations. Captain Chen's story was one of sacrifice and courage that went far beyond the simple heroism of combat flying. She had spent years living among enemies, gathering information and maintaining a cover identity that could have cost her life if discovered. As Jake returned to his duties, he reflected on the lessons he had learned about trust, assumptions, and the importance of understanding situations before making judgments. The morning had begun with suspicion and fear, but it ended with respect and admiration for a fellow service member whose dedication went far beyond what most people would ever know or understand.